Q Review Print Speaking to the Blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @CuneReview, that is @ CUEANDREVIEW. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@cunereview.com. That is INFORMATION @CUEANDREVIEW.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
This is from the Herald Scotland of Tuesday, the 18th of November 2025, from the Voices section. Scotland green jobs hopes dim as Shell axes £3 billion project. This article is by Mark Williamson. Hopes that a new generation of floating wind farms could power a jobs boom in Scotland have been dashed after an oil giant lost interest in a £3 billion project. The SNP government is facing fresh threats to its credibility after renewed claims about the potential for a green energy boom in Scotland were undermined by a disastrous reverse on a key initiative. Ministers were left reeling last week after Shell scrapped plans for a floating wind farm project that had generated huge excitement. The oil and gas giant announced it had decided to hand back the lease for the Campion Wind project that it was awarded as part of the flagship ScotWind round, which it was claimed would deliver a major boost to Scotland's net zero aspirations. Shell made the decision after investing lots of time and effort in trying to work up a plan to deliver one of the new-style floating wind farms that the SNP government decided could power a boom in offshore supply chain activity. Floating wind farms can be moored further offshore than those with foundations on the seabed, allowing them to harness stronger and more consistent winds. 3 years after bidding successfully in the ScotWind round in 2022, Shell appears to have had a dramatic change of heart about the proposed Campion Wind development east of Aberdeen. In a statement made in support of its ScotWind application, Shell held out the prospect that Campion Wind could generate £3.2 billion worth of work for the Scottish supply chain. The company said, "We welcome the opportunity to develop floating offshore wind at a commercial scale in Scotland and will work to collaborate with relevant parties openly and constructively if awarded a site via the ScotWind leasing process. We are committed to a future that is green and believe we can deliver a successful project which will help the Scottish Government drive towards their net zero target by 2045. Announcing the decision to hand back the lease last week, Shell said, after a comprehensive review, the conclusion was to not take the Campion Wind project forward. The decision has serious implications for Scotland, and not just because it leaves a key project in limbo. The move is important for what it says about the change in attitudes towards wind farms and the like amongst giants such as Shell. In 2022, Shell was led by Ben van Beurden, who was eager to position the firms as a broader-based energy business that would invest heavily in renewables in support of the global drive to reduce emissions. Floating wind farms were seen as an obvious way in which Shell could use the expertise it gained developing oil and gas fields to support low-carbon energy projects. Since Vail Sawan succeeded Mr. van burden in 2023, Shell has grown sceptical about the potential of renewables and decided to refocus on oil and gas. Months after taking charge, Mr. Sawan expressed doubts about the commercial viability of floating wind developments in a call with analysts. Other firms that won success in the ScotWind round appear to be having second thoughts. BP wants to limit the amount of upfront spending on renewables developments after deciding to refocus investment on oil and gas. If Shell could have found a buyer for Campion Wind, it would likely have sold its stake in the project. It was notable that Campion Wind was excluded from the North Sea assets that Shell agreed to include in the joint venture it decided last year to form with Equinor, the Norwegian oil giant. Equinor developed the pioneering Hywind floating wind farm off Scotland. Shell has transferred its interest in the Marram Wind floating wind project to Scottish Power, with which it planned to complete the Campion Wind development. Scottish Power will soldier on with Marram, but apparently did not fancy persevering with Campion Wind. But the Scottish Government has beat the drum about floating wind with increasing enthusiasm in recent months. In the Offshore Wind Focus paper published in September last year, ministers boasted the outcome of the ScotWind leasing round in 2022 gave Scotland a significant first-mover advantage for the development of floating offshore wind technologies and supply chain. The paper claimed the new floating wind supply chain would create thousands of green, highly skilled jobs. The Scottish Government highlighted the paper's findings in December when it announced it would provide £150 million of support for the offshore wind supply chain in the 2025-26 budget. Energy Minister Gillian Martin said then, "This significant investment will help boost innovation and expertise in the sector, create a highly productive and competitive economy, and deliver a sustainable supply chain that will benefit all of Scotland for decades to come. We will work with industry and public sector partners to ensure we identify and deliver the best projects at pace." The £150 commitment forms part of a £500 million programme launched in 2023 that has 3 years to run. Shell's decision suggests the Scottish Government has not done enough since launching the programme to persuade investors the support required for floating wind developments will be in place. The company announced the move weeks after the Scottish Government repeated claims about the potential of offshore wind in the draft climate action plan that it published last month. The plan claimed policies developed by the government would support a significant increase in offshore wind generating capacity by 2030. It said renewable and low-carbon energy will provide the foundation of our future energy system, offering Scotland a huge opportunity for economic growth that will support workers to access jobs in these emerging growth areas and enable businesses and communities across these supply chains to benefit. Friends of the Earth Scotland complained the plan contained nothing to help oil workers that could be harmed by cuts in North Sea investment or people struggling to pay their energy bills. But the SNP government will probably keep on talking up the potential of floating wind in an attempt to distract attention from its past failings. Predictions by First Ministers from Alex Salmond onwards that investment in wind farms fixed to the seabed would provide a big boost to the jobs market in Scotland proved to be wildly over-optimistic. The question now is whether other firms that were awarded ScotWind leases for floating wind projects will go ahead. As things stand, developers are likely to demand huge subsidies to persuade them to make the investment required. Floating wind remains much more expensive than other forms of renewable energy. In the last official subsidy round, the Green Volt floating wind project was guaranteed £139.93 per megawatt hour for its output. That compares with 54.23 per kilowatt hour for the Inch Cape fixed bottom development. The costs of this programme are added to the energy bills paid by UK householders. It is thought that Rachel Reeves may cut the 5% VAT rate applied to energy bills in the budget she will announce on November the 26th to try to mollify critics of the renewables subsidy programme. There were signs last week that some firms that had been enthusiastic about fixed bottom projects were cooling on that sector. Scottish energy giant SSE noted it is shifting its focus to investment in the networks that will be required to take the output from wind farms to users. With so much uncertainty about the prospects for offshore wind investment, the SNP government will come under increased pressure to drop its opposition to North Sea oil developments. Former First Ministers Nicola Sturgeon and Humza Yousaf opposed plans for Equinor's giant Rosebank project off Shetland, which backers say could support thousands of jobs. Current First Minister John Swinney may be preparing the ground for a policy change. He has resisted pressure from the Greens to come out against Rosebank. But the concerns about floating wind triggered by Shell's action will also cause difficulties for the Labour government at Westminster, amid calls for it to cut the North Sea windfall tax in the budget. Energy Minister Ed Miliband has been as boosterish as his SNP rivals about the economic potential of renewables, while undermining the North Sea oil and gas industry by proposing to ban new exploration licenses. That article was by Mark Williamson. This is from the Herald Scotland of Tuesday the 18th of November 2025 from the Voices section. Why the SNP will be able to talk the talk without walking the walk. This article is by Gregor Gall. Columnist Gregor Gall explains why a series of Scottish election Groundhog Days, a tedious, repetitive cycle of events, lies ahead of us. It's not exactly breaking news, but the SNP is on course to not only be the party with the most members of the Scottish Parliament after the election on May the 7th next year, but also form the next Scottish government. This will mark the beginning of a third decade in office for the SNP. What is not quite so well appreciated is that the SNP is on course to do so with its lowest share of the vote since 2007, when it formed a minority government for the first time. The continuation of SNP governance on such a low score will merely emphasise the reality that society in Scotland is caught in the clutches of a stasis, neither able to move backwards nor forwards, but just crab-like crawl sideways. Of course, going back would not be welcomed in whatever shape that might take, but equally frustrating is the lack of movement forward, where much is promised, but so little in the way of palpable, manifest change is actually achieved. Let's just first look at the numbers. Of course, a health warning is first in order. Polling only gives us a glimpse of how a limited number of people, usually around 1,000 citizens, would vote if an election was hypothetically held tomorrow, as the question asked of them puts it. Whether those polled were representative of the wider population is an ongoing issue, and polling is merely a snapshot of intentions, not a hard and fast prediction. Nonetheless, on the constituency vote since the last Holyrood election in 2021, polling indicates the SNP share of the vote has fallen from high to mid-40s to low to mid-30s. On the regional list vote, the same polling indicates the SNP share of the vote has fallen from around 40% to now the high 20s. This compares poorly to the SNP's percentage vote share in the 2021 Holyrood election of 48% in the constituencies and 40% on the list vote, as it does for the 2016, 46% and 42%, and 2011, 45% and 44% elections. In 2007, the respective figures were 33% and 31%, which is why we do seem to be treading the same turf as before. In the last two Holyrood elections in 2016 and 2021, the SNP vote on the regional list seats was essentially a wasted one, as it secured the SNP not many more MSPs than in the constituencies because of the use of the D'Hondt method. The SNP relying on its haul of MSPs in those list seats may be one of the few new electoral developments of 2026, but this would only mean taking us back to 2007, when the SNP secured most of its MSPs via the regional list seats. Again, the sense of stasis is thus significant. Staying with the polling numbers, the falling popularity of Labour in Scotland, led by Anas Sarwar, and south of the border by Keir Starmer, since the general election last year, and the rise of reform, are almost mirror images of each other. Meantime, the Scottish Greens show no sign of a Zach Polanski-style breakthrough, as is happening south of the border for the Green Party of England and Wales. And the Scottish radical left, in whatever form it eventually presents itself to us, as will suffer another crushing defeat, ably helped by the ongoing shenanigans of your party, which will be so late onto the electoral pitch as to miss most of the match. Turning away from the polling numbers, Labour used to rule the roost in Scotland from 1964 until 2015 in terms of MPs. This predominantly represented for many years a positive vote for the party and not a result of any tactical voting or voting for the least worst option. Many believed Labour was a workers' party and supported the working class. Some thought it held a social democratic, even socialist worldview. That was the case, even if the so-called feeble 50 Labour MPs in Scotland from the 1987 general election were ably lambasted by the SNP as being unable to provide the necessary dented shield strategy against Thatcherism. By contrast, in 2026, the SNP will win despite itself. Its electoral support will represent a vote against a right-wing, London-controlled Labour Party, where the Scottish branch office is obsequious to its master as well as a vote against a racist and reactionary reform. This will give the SNP the ability to do what it does best, namely talk the talk, without walking the walk, and being good at saying what it is against, but poor on saying what it is for. Some might put this as starkly as the SNP talking left but acting right, or always blaming a big boy down south that did it and ran away, so that it is never to blame for or responsible for regression and inertia. Meanwhile, the public services, many of which are devolved, and that so many people rely upon, decline and deteriorate in both quality and quantity, with the consequence that social inequality continues to increase. In this situation, it would be a very unkind and uncaring person that would venture that the electorate gets exactly the government it deserves. What's worse is that this stasis could mean that the SNP has a dominance for many years to come simply because it is the least worst option. And all this is without considering the claptrap the SNP continually spouts about its plans for gaining both a second independence referendum and independence itself. The phrase Groundhog Day comes to mind, describing a tedious, repetitive cycle of events. Another phase that comes to mind and gives grist to the mill is that of the more things change, the more they stay the same. Either way, there's not necessarily much to look forward to next year. That article was by Gregor Gall.
This is from the Herald on Thursday 13th November 2025, from the News section. Govan Hill Library needs new roof, but no money available for repairs. By Sarah Hilly. Glasgow's historic Govan Hill Library needs a new roof at a cost of £266,000, but there is no public money currently available to carry out the job. A survey undertaken after a leak was found revealed that extensive work is now needed. A small leak caused by Storm Éowyn is being managed to make sure water does not get into the B-listed building which was opened in 1906. Local councillor Soria Siddique said, Govan Hill Library is a cornerstone of this community, a place where people can come to learn and connect. It's unacceptable that vital public buildings like this are left waiting for repairs because of limited funding. The Southside Central Labour politician added, Our residents deserve well-maintained spaces, not delays to repairs. The question is, why was it allowed to get into this condition? I will continue to campaign for the investment needed to protect and preserve Govan Hill Library for future generations. Time is of the essence. A spokesperson for charity Glasgow Life, the council's leisure operator, said, A full roof survey of Govan Hill Library has been completed, which confirmed £266,000 would be required to replace the roof. At present, available capital funding has been fully allocated across Glasgow Life's estate, meaning these major works cannot be progressed immediately. The small leak previously identified continues to be managed locally and has minimal impact on the operation of the building. The spokesperson continued, Glasgow Life manages a large and varied portfolio of venues across the city. No venue has a dedicated maintenance and repairs budget. Work across the whole estate is prioritised based on need and available resources to ensure all venues remain safe and welcoming for staff and visitors. That article was by Sarah Hilly.
The Herald Scotland on Friday the 14th of November 2025.
from the Voices section. Labour's looming tax U-turn risks fueling Britain's politics of anger. This article has been written by Mark McGeohagan and it's being read by me, Corey. By breaking their promises on tax in the upcoming budget, Labour risk not just deepening distrust in politics, but animating the politics of anger, writes Herald columnist Mark McGeohagan. Trust in politics is at rock bottom, as is satisfaction with government performance north and south of the border. While record low satisfaction with the Scottish Government is a recent phenomenon, the crisis of trust in our institutions and the people who run them is a long-running chaotic problem. The looming budget, in which the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is expected to break Labour's manifesto promises not to raise income tax, employee national insurance or VAT, puts Labour at the epicentre of that crisis of trust. It also threatens to animate deeper and more dangerous emotions. Political trust in Scotland was, for over a decade, buttressed by the perceptions of the SNP Scottish Government as competent, and then by the polarisation of the Scottish public on independence. According to the Scottish Social Attitudes Survey in 2021, 61% of Scots trusted the Scottish Government to work in Scotland's best interests, below the SNP peak in 2015 of 73%, but higher than had been recorded at any point under Labour, Liberal Democrat governments of the 2000s. 2 years later, in 2023, that had fallen to an all-time low of 47%. By 2024, satisfaction with the performance of the Scottish NHS had also fallen to an all-time low of just 22%, from a pre-pandemic high of 64% in early 2020. The same applies to most policy areas the Scottish Government is responsible for. Faith in the government at Westminster, on the other hand, has been low for decades. Scots' trust in the UK Government to work in Scotland's best interest has trundled along at around 20% since 2000, with a couple of exceptions like the peak of 35% when Gordon Brown became Prime Minister, still well below the Scottish Government's nadir. This is not just a reality in Scotland but across the UK. According to British Social Attitudes Study in 2000, just 16% of Brits said they trust the UK Government all or most of the time. Last year that was 12%. What has really changed is the depth of distrust. In 2000, 24% of people said they rarely trust the UK government. By last year, that had almost doubled to 46%. Last July, distrust and dissatisfaction with politics and government broke the British party system. The two largest parties, Labour and the Conservatives, won their lowest combined share of votes since 1918. Between them, the populist and secessionist parties won a combined 24.6% of the vote UK-wide, more than the Conservatives. Now, Labour and the Conservatives sit on 37% of the vote in the most recent YouGov poll, with the populist and nationalist parties on a combined 46%. When Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister in 2022, he promised to restore trust in politics following Partygate and the disaster of Liz Truss's mini-budget. He failed. Labour came into power last year promising to return Britain to the service of working people. In Sir Keir Starmer's words, his government now looks likely to break one of its few clear, well-known manifesto commitments. I understand, as do most level-headed commentators and analysts, why taxes must be increased. As I put it in these pages back in July, the notion that Labour could repair the public finances without increasing one of the big three taxes or fundamentally reforming other aspects of taxation was for the birds. Those promises were bluntly stupid promises to make. They were commitments initially designed to reassure voters weary of economic burden, but they instead painted Labour into a corner. Promising no tax hikes tied Labour's hands behind their backs, limiting their ability to respond effectively to the economic challenges that we could all see coming down the tracks. Those promises also deprived Labour of the space needed to win a mandate for a specific governing project. The Labour government is coming unmoored because they lack a coherent strategy. And they lack a coherent strategy because the Prime Minister has no political project beyond the one gifted to him by Morgan McSweeney, his embattled Chief of Staff, to win and retain power. That simply isn't enough. They created unrealistic expectations that Britain could be fixed without touching those taxes, setting themselves up for potential backlash. The upcoming budget will further deepen distrust and dissatisfaction with politics. And I worry just how much worse this could get. 82% of Brits are dissatisfied with the UK government, according to Ipsos. 76% of us do not trust politicians to be truthful, according to YouGov, and most of us think politicians are in it for themselves. Just 4% think they put the country first. Just how bad can trust in politics get? Just how dissatisfied can people become? I recall having a conversation with a client back in the late 2010s on exactly this question, and ever since then I have become increasingly convinced that even these concepts, trust, satisfaction, really aren't sufficient to describe how people feel about politics today. We have come nowhere near plumbing the depths of negative emotions that voters can feel towards politicians. We've seen glimpses, for example, in the form of anti-immigration riots. I fear that this is the tip of a very dangerous iceberg. Work published in April this year by Professors Ailsa Henderson and Richard Wynne Jones found that in England 60% of voters say current politics makes them feel angry. 55% said it makes them feel fearful, and 78% frustrated. Just 9% reported feeling hopeful, and just 3% happy. As Professor Henderson put it, English politics is marked by continued grievance, frustration, and anger rather than hope. It would not shock me if essentially the same findings held in Scotland, or in Wales, or in Northern Ireland. The danger facing us is not that the broken promises of this Labour government will deepen distrust or dissatisfaction, but that it will animate the politics of anger and, at the margin, hate. It sounds hyperbolic to say that Britain stands at a precipice, and I would push back forcefully on figures like Elon Musk who say we are on the verge of a civil war. But we certainly need a better calibre of politician, capable of easing ill-feeling, building trust, and delivering a vision that can rally the British public. Sir Keir, his Chancellor, and their teams are, I'm afraid, not those politicians. That article was from the Herald Scotland. It was from the Voices section. It was written by Mark McGeohagan, and it was read by me, Corey. The Herald Scotland on Friday the 14th of November 2025. From the Voices section. Scrapping the licence fee would be good for BBC Scotland. This article has been written by Andy McIver, and it's being read by me, Corey. As the country once again debates the impartiality of the BBC, Herald columnist Andy McIver argues that the licence fee should be scrapped, that the BBC should operate commercially, and that local and regional news here in Scotland would be the biggest winner. Impartiality, a bit like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. This week we are in the midst of another round of national angst over whether the BBC is impartial or biased. This happens more often these days than it did in the past. in large part because the BBC places itself in hot water more often than it did in the past. The BBC's public troubles tend to peak as a result of an individual event. Gary Lineker straying away from his football comfort zone to opine on Israel and the Middle East. Maxine Croxall being admonished for changing a script in real life to clarify that pregnancy is unique to women and not people. And on this occasion, a speech by President Trump being remarkably edited by amalgamating 2 sentences from a long speech, spoken nearly an hour apart, making it appear that the President was inciting violence ahead of the January 6th riots. Frankly, it wouldn't be difficult to show the President played a role in that dark day without an edit, but the BBC decided to pick up a shotgun and blow its foot off, just for good measure. These isolated incidents, understandably, attract all the focus and create the room for a conversation about the future of the BBC. That is fine. It is the right conversation to have, so I suppose it matters little how we reach it. In reality, though, the public calamities are a result of a series of underlying biases which have been presented in the BBC for as long as I have been following news, which is the best part of 30 years now. The BBC is not an impartial news organisation. It never has been. It has a series of ingrained biases, which are ever presented in its news and current affairs programming, usually sitting just beneath the surface but occasionally bursting through, as it did when it produced the Trump edit. Bias in itself is inevitable, because people are people. Everyone who works for the BBC, from researchers to presenters to producers to editors, are normal people, with normal lives and normal views. Of course, we might like to think that those views have no impact on their work, but that would be utterly naive, would it not? Of course, the BBC employee will take their unconscious biases to the workplace, just as those who work for STV or Sky, or indeed this great newspaper, the Herald, will take their unconscious biases to work. The difference, of course, is that people who work for every other media outlet are allowed to exercise varying degrees of partiality in a way that those who work at the BBC are, in theory, not. What makes it even harder for those at the BBC is that its very existence attracts staff with a particular worldview. As a state broadcaster which explicitly rejects commerciality and competition, we can fairly make a default assumption that it will tend to attract people with a fairly well-honed public is better than private ethos. That manifests itself in a number of predictable ways. The BBC is extremely favourable towards the monarchy. It treats private interventions in the NHS with great suspicion. Its worldview is generally sceptical towards US Republicans and favourable towards European Social Democrats. It is relatively uncritical of the methods by which the country is pursuing net zero. Now, I happen to agree with the BBC's emphasis on some of these, and disagree on others. But that is the point, isn't it? Everyone's definition of impartiality revolves around their own views. So we are expecting something from the BBC that the BBC cannot reasonably deliver. We are expecting it to reflect the views of all of the people all of the time. Enough is enough. It is time for the BBC to operate in the same world as all of its competitors, and put itself at the mercy of subscribers who can exercise a choice to pay for BBC content rather than being forced to. This would immediately free the BBC from its daily contractions as it attempts to attract unattainable impartiality. The BBC produces high-quality current affairs and outstanding entertainment. I would undoubtedly choose to subscribe just as I chose to subscribe to Sky and Netflix. but by allowing people to choose, you remove their ability to complain when they dislike the output. In Scotland, though, there would be a more profound and important outcome to scrapping the licence fee and commercialising the BBC. The BBC remains utterly dominant in the dissemination of the news in Scotland. Ofcom data shows that offline television remains the most dominant source of news. Despite the remarkable resilience of STV, relative budgets make it David versus the BBC Goliath, and BBC remains the most watched platform. Social media and the internet is the second highest source of news, and the BBC website is easily the most dominant. Third highest radio, and after Bayer Media's combined local stations, BBC stations come second, third, fourth and fifth. The BBC therefore has an utterly dominant market position, and it is not difficult to understand why. It's because it is free. Imagine being the editor of this great paper, and indeed the Scotsman or Scotland's historic regional titles. You ask people to pay to access the content on your news website every day, while your dominant competitor is offering bbc.co.uk for nothing. This is like having 4 pubs in a village with one offering free beer. Sure, the others will get some punters based on the quality of their IPA and the depth of knowledge of their bartenders, but ultimately, free beer is free beer, and the free pub will always be full. If I could flick a switch, I'd take bbc.co.uk offline today. Scotland is lacking plural, in-depth, quality news on a national and regional basis, particularly to enhance coverage of politics and business. The Scottish media needs a level playing field to give it a fair crack at a 21st century renaissance. That level playing field is only achievable when the BBC is an equal participant in the fair market, and that needs the licence fee to be scrapped. That article was from the Herald Scotland. It was from the Voices section. It was written by Andy McIver, and it was read by me, Corey.
From the Herald Scotland, Sunday the 16th of November 2025, Politics. Corbyn says your party are likely to stand at Holyrood and could back yes. Article written by political editor Andrew Learmonth. Jeremy Corbyn says your party is preparing to stand in next year's Holyrood election and may ultimately back Scottish independence. The comments come as the fledgling left-wing party attempts to steady itself after a bruising week of internal rows, allegations of a toxic culture, and a confrontation over control of hundreds of thousands of pounds in donations. Speaking to the Herald during a visit to Scotland, the former Labour leader said there was pressure from Scottish supporters to stand on the list. Everyone I have met who supports your party in Scotland says we should be contesting elections, and I agree with them, and we should, he said. Mr Corbyn added, it's going to be tight as a timetable because we will have the National Conference in Liverpool at the end of this month, and we will then be holding a Scottish Assembly. In reality, that will probably be in early January. Not too early January because we have to get past the holiday period. That will be the time for us to contest the Holyrood elections on the list system. Asked about the party's policy platform, Mr Corbyn said the founding documents already set out a broad direction. Well, the policies will be as are laid out in the founding statement on issues of redistribution of wealth and power, taxation issues, also giving the people of Scotland the right to decide their own future, he said. It will be decided by the party at the Scottish level and not be decided by me, he added. But the principle would be that if the Scottish organisation of your party believes that it is right to have a referendum, that will be our policy. Asked if they would campaign for a yes vote, Mr Corbyn said, my impression is that most Scottish members would support independence. This is my impression. I do think that is the way I am reading it. He suggested many of those joining had travelled a broad path across the Scottish centre-left. There are people who have joined your party that have been in every other party, or certainly every one of the centre-lefts, who are people that have been in Labour, have been in Greens and so on, he said. The former Labour leader was in Glasgow for a series of regional assemblies. Organisers said around 200 supporters attended events taking place in 3 different venues. However, the events were overshadowed by an increasingly bitter internal battle over close to £800,000 in donations raised during your party's launch. The money was collected earlier this year while the movement was still being registered and is currently held by MOU Operations Limited, a company legally controlled by Zara Sultana. Her team says she became sole director only after the other 5 independent MPs involved in setting up the party declined to join her as co-directors, leaving her personally responsible for ensuring the company was properly run and that all liabilities were settled before any transfer of funds. Last week, Ms Sultana authorised the transfer of an initial £200,000, promising that further instalments will be paid as soon as possible as the legal details are ironed out. But her colleagues on the steering group, Mr Corbyn, Adnan Hussain, Shaukat Adam, Ayub Khan and Iqbal Mohammed, described that first payment as insufficient, issuing a joint statement saying they would pursue the immediate recovery of the remaining money. They argued that the delay had left the party severely restricted, with volunteers attempting to organise a founding conference on what they described as a shoestring budget. On Friday, Mr Hussain stepped away from the steering group, accusing the party of a toxic culture, clique-like behaviour and persistent infighting. He also said that he had been deeply troubled by the way Muslim men had been spoken about and treated, describing language he had heard as carrying veiled prejudice. Asked about the comments, Mr Corbyn said, Adnan is part of the Independent Alliance group of MPs, part of the establishment of the party. He has become very frustrated, and he decided that he would step aside, but he is not stepping aside from the Independent Alliance group of MPs. And he is a colleague that I value very much. I work with him very closely in Parliament on a whole range of issues, and he is also a very smart man, a very intelligent lawyer. He added, yes, he has decided he is going to step aside for the moment, but he is not disappearing, and our party has to be a party that welcomes everyone from all sections of community and all faiths, and none, and we will do that. Mr Corbyn acknowledged the turbulence. We have had a tough week, as everybody knows, he said. That tough week is finished because it is now the weekend. Mr Corbyn said he believed members and activists were focused on the party's developing programme rather than its turmoil. He also argued the media's interest in internal rows was overshadowing policy debates. It is a media story because there is nothing the media love more than a fight within a party, he said. What I wish would happen, but it never will, is that the media would become obsessed with levels of poverty and injustice and inequality in our society. Asked whether he would stand for leader once the party formalises its structure, Mr Corbyn said, I am available to contribute. I want to make this party to be established. I want it to be up and running, and I will play my part in getting it up and running, and make sure that we develop something that is there for future generations, and that is what I am determined to be. Polling expert Mark Diffley said UK-wide polls would suggest the Greens are most vulnerable to your party, though he pointed out that recent polling had shown a boost in support for the Green Party of England and Wales after the election of Zach Polanski as leader. Last month, 3 Scottish Green councillors in Glasgow, Dan Hutchison, Sinead Hoy and Leadless Massey, became your party's first elected representatives in Scotland after defecting. 2 Glasgow MSP candidates and 3 West of Scotland MSP candidates also jumped ship. Mr Diffley told the Herald, time is now running pretty short and they are going to have to get their act together, but yes, UK-wide polling would suggest that the Greens. I do not think it would be much different up here. The 20% or so that still supports Labour is not particularly left-wing, so Labour is not likely, in my view, to lose a huge amount of support in Scotland to your party. I do not think the SNP will either, particularly. But we do not know yet what your party are going to say. They do not really have a platform yet. We know it is run by Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana, so we kind of know where they are on the political spectrum, but we have not got a detailed perspective on what they are going to say on the Constitution, for example. So, in lieu of that, and in lieu of appearing in opinion polls as a definite option, then I think we have to be careful about what their potential impact might be. That article was written by Andrew Learmonth. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 17th of November 2025, from the news section. Drunk driver killed a grandad in 91 miles per hour crash in Paisley, by Connor Gordon. A drunk driver killed a grandad in a 90-mile-an-hour smash. Callum Fox, 29, struck pedestrian Jim Patterson, 63, in Paisley in the early hours of November the 27th, 2022. Fox, who was described as really drunk, had earlier been at a cocktail bar with friends and ignored a plea for him not to drive. However, Fox got behind the wheel of his Mercedes AMG A45 to go to a house party, while 2.5 times over the limit. Jim was heading home after a curry night with his friend and cousin when he encountered speeding Fox as he crossed the road. Dad of 3 Jim, who was married for 46 years, unfortunately lost his life at the scene. First offender Fox pleaded guilty today at the High Court in Glasgow to causing death by dangerous driving. Judge Lord Cuby said, "You caused the tragic and untimely death of Mr. Patterson. There is nothing the court can do to properly the loss and devastation which is still evident today. The offence arose as a consequence of your alcohol intake. You were 2.5 times over the limit. This was your own selfish disregard for the road and your own convenience against the advice given to you. The speed reached a material impact. It was grossly excessive, doing 90 miles per hour in a 30 while accelerating. It gave Mr. Patterson no chance of survival. The state of the appalling driving cannot be higher. And standing the plea and consequences to Mr. Patterson, a subsequent prison sentence will follow." The court heard that Jim was a plater and shipyard worker who was in good health and a keen golfer. He was married to Margaret Fadian, which gifted him 3 adult children and grandchildren. Jim had been with his cousin Ron Patterson eating, drinking and watching football in the home of Ian Richardson in Paisley. Jim had drank some beer during the evening but was not drunk when he left to go home at 12:15 a.m. Fox, meantime, had been with 2 friends drinking 6 or 7 drinks at Limon's cocktail and sports bar in Paisley. Fox, described by a friend as really drunk, got behind the wheel of his car to drive them to a house party in the Fox Bar area. A friend recalled saying to Fox that he should not drive but could not remember the reply. Witnesses reported that Fox as overtaking at speed and driving really fast, as well as swerving all over the road. Prosecutor Alex Prentice KC said, "Just after 12:26 a.m, Mr. Patterson started to cross the road and was struck by Fox's car. Airbag analysis found that Fox had driven from 66 miles per hour 5 seconds before the crash up to 91 miles per hour on collision. The speed limit for the road was 30 miles per hour. Fox and his friends remained at the scene after the crash while medics arrived. Jim was pronounced dead at 12:33 a.m, having suffered significant external and internal injuries. This included fractures of the skull, spine, sternum and collarbone. His left arm and lower legs were amputated. When quizzed, Fox told officers, "It was me, I was driving when I hit the guy." A breath test found he had 113 milligrams of alcohol per 100 millilitres of breath, when the legal limit is 50 milligrams. John Scully in KC, defending, told the court, "My client is under no illusion that he will receive nothing other than custody." Sentence was deferred pending a background report until January at the High Court in Kilmarnock. Self-employed timeshare salesman Fox, of Paisley, had his remand in custody continued meantime. That article was written by Connor Gordon. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 17th of November 2025, from the Politics section. Reform MSP Graham Simpson described as a bit of a snowflake, by Rebecca McCurdy, political correspondent. Scotland's only Reform MSP has been branded a bit of a snowflake after he complained that a former colleague would no longer speak to him following his defection to Nigel Farage's party. Graham Simpson defected to Reform UK in August, but said last week that a former Tory colleague was not even looking at me, let alone talking to me. But Scottish Tory leader Russell Finlay criticised his former colleague after Reform MSP addressed the breakdown in relationship. Mr Finlay claimed his former MSP was a reformed snowflake. He said he could completely understand why one of his MSPs would not want to engage with someone who has committed such an act of treachery. Speaking about Mr Simpson, the Scottish Tory leader added, "This is the same politician who looked his colleagues in the eye and told them that he wasn't going to defect, and then duly did so. So, perhaps, I can completely understand why colleagues wouldn't want to engage with someone who has committed such an act of treachery." Mr Finlay's comments came after Central Scotland MSP Mr Simpson said, "There is a difference between slagging off reform, which is expected to happen in the run-up to a Scottish Parliament election, and slagging off the individual." The Reform MSP told Holyrood magazine he had been very clear that he would not indulge in that kind of behaviour. Mr Simpson insisted, "I'm not going to get down and dirty and start attacking individuals for their character or personality, when it should be a debate about policy." He appeared alongside Reform UK leader Mr Farage in August as he defected, becoming Reform's only current representation in Scotland. During his defection, he said he had joined the party to create something new, exciting and lasting. He has been tasked with creating Reform's manifesto for the Holyrood election next year, describing this as a massive job, as he said not much thought had been given to devolved policy areas. "We're going to have to produce something that's not just immigration and net zero," he added. According to a recent poll carried out by Survation for IPPR Scotland think tank, Mr Farage's party could return 22 MSPs, becoming the second largest group in Holyrood. On how many he would like to see return to Parliament, Mr Simpson said, "Over 20. He continued, "It might sound ambitious, but you may as well be ambitious. At the moment, I would say around the 20 mark would be good. Over that would be very good." That article was written by political correspondent Rebecca McCurdy and read by me, Ian McKenna. From the Herald Scotland, Sunday the 16th of November 2025, from the Arts and Entertainment section. Sir Billy Connolly makes rare public appearance at Florida Film Fest. Report by Jodie Harrison. Sir Billy Connolly made a rare public appearance to pick up an award celebrating his decades in show business. The Big Un, 82, was a guest of honour at Key West Film Festival in Florida and was presented with an award for artistic excellence given by long-term friends and Hollywood stars Steve Buscemi and Aidan Quinn. Sir Billy did not take to the stage. Instead, supporting himself with a walking stick and wearing tight-fitting blue trousers, he stood up as Buscemi passed him the blue-coloured award shaped like a water droplet. He told the crowd around him, "I walk with a stick because I suffer from a horrible illness. It is a joy to live among you, and it's a joy to be among you tonight. I don't often do this kind of thing, but it's smashing. I have to thank you for this award. I don't know what it is, it's a blue thing. It's a joy, and it will go beside my other prizes." The Scot also joked about his wife Pamela Stevenson forcing him to wear terrible trousers to the event. Reservoir Dogs star Buscemi, 67, became friends with Sir Billy when they appeared together in the 1998 film The Impostors. The crowd heard that Sir Billy and his wife Pamela invited Steve Buscemi and his family to visit Scotland and stay with them in a castle they used to own. He said, "One day on set, Billy offhandedly mentioned, 'You know, if you're ever in Scotland, Pamela and I have a castle, you should drop by.' We always had the best time. It's wonderful to be here to honour our friend Billy Connolly." Desperately Seeking Susan star Quinn, 66, emotionally told how the only thing that gave his late brother Paul joy during his battle with cancer was watching videos of Sir Billy stand up on YouTube. Connolly moved to Florida in 2013 to live in a warmer climate following his diagnosis with Parkinson's disease. The Glasgow comedian retired, touring officially in 2018. Since then, he has turned his attention to drawing and painting, with several exhibitions of his work, titled the Born on a Rainy Day collection. He has described art as giving him a new lease of life. Connolly has also been involved with the Glasgow International Comedy Festival, having the casting vote in the judging panel for the Spirit of Glasgow Award. That article was written by Jodie Harrison. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 17th of November 2025, from the news section. Tributes to Scottish victim of County Louth crash, which claimed 5 lives. By Neil Puran. Tributes have been paid to the Scottish student who died in a crash in Ireland which claimed the lives of 4 other young people. Chloe Hipson, 21, was among the 5 who died in the crash near Dundalk, County Louth, on Saturday night. South Lanarkshire College, where Ms Hipson studied before moving to Ireland, said students and staff are deeply saddened to hear of her death. The group were travelling together in a Volkswagen Golf while on their way to Dundalk for a night out. As well as Ms Hipson, who was from Bellshill in North Lanarkshire, those killed were Chloe McGee, 23, and Shea Duffy, 21, both from Carrickmacross in County Monaghan. Alan McCluskey, 23, from Drumconrath in County Meath, and Dylan Commons, 23, from ID in County Louth. A 6th person who was in the car, also aged in his 20s, is receiving medical treatment in hospital for non-life-threatening injuries. Ms Hipson's former college released a statement saying, "Everyone at South Lanarkshire College is deeply saddened by the sudden passing of Chloe Hipson. Chloe was a bright and dedicated student who studied in our quantity surveying programme and was highly regarded by all her classmates and staff at the college. Our thoughts are with Chloe's family and friends at this incredibly difficult time. A number of amateur football teams in Lanarkshire have offered their condolences following Ms Hipson's death. North Motherwell FC, where her brother Ryan Hipson was a veteran player, said they would be holding a minute's silence. The club said, "Ryan, you and your family have always held a special place in the hearts of everyone at NMSC and are very much still part of our football family. I'm sure everyone will join me in sending our deepest condolences to you, Tony, Ryan, wee Tommy and all your family at this life-shattering time." Bellshill Amateurs FC posted on social media, "The club was devastated today to learn of the passing of Chloe Hipson, the younger sister of our own Ryan Hipson. Our thoughts, prayers and deepest sympathies are with Ryan and his family at this incredibly difficult time. Before our game on Saturday, we will show our respects to Chloe with a minute's applause prior to kick-off." Amateur side Fir Park Corner FC said, "Everyone at Fir Park Corner would like to offer our deepest condolences to the family and friends of Chloe Hipson. Our thoughts are especially with Ryan Hipson, who played against us yesterday before receiving such devastating news. The whole football community stands with you." Friends also posted tributes on social media, with one describing her as absolutely one of a kind, the funniest, most gorgeous girl in the land. The incident on Saturday night involved the Golf, which the group were travelling in, and a Toyota Land Cruiser, and happened on a road near Dundalk just after 9 p.m. 2 other people, a man and a woman from the other vehicle, were taken to Our Lady of Lourdes Hospital, Drogheda, for treatment for non-life-threatening injuries. Ireland's Premier Michael Martin said he was numbed and shocked at the news, and Deputy Premier Simon Harris said a veil of deep sadness had come over the country. That report was written by Neil Puran and read by Ian McKenna.
From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 17th of November 2025, from the Voices section. Budget looms as Westminster infighting exposes lack of vision. Article written by Ros Foyer, STUC General Secretary. As Westminster descends into infighting ahead of the budget, Ros Foyer argues that tackling extreme wealth inequality through fairer taxes and bold reforms is the only way to rebuild a broken economy and restore public trust. Every so often, the political class makes you scratch your head and wonder, what planet are you living on? With a budget less than 2 weeks away, the UK government decided that last week was the opportune moment to descend into bitter infighting. When the stakes are this high, this wasn't just self-indulgent, but entirely self-defeating. How did we get here? The sad truth is that too many politicians have no clear idea how to improve living standards for the majority of people in this country. Instead of setting out a serious programme to rebalance wealth and power, they manoeuvre to protect their positions and power base. They appoint unaccountable advisers who treat politics like it's just a glorified gap year on their LinkedIn CV before they inevitably jaunt off to the private sector to rake in the cash. They brief against colleagues. They try to tape a debate, telling us we can't have nice things for fear of upsetting bond markets or the wealthy elite. Politics has always had its chaotic side, but post-Brexit anyway, it's rarely been this much of a circus. Where Parliament once included working-class leaders shaped by their experience in the workplace, it's now dominated by professionalised politicians with little understanding of the challenges ordinary people face, let alone a vision to fix them. And while the briefings and gossip dominate Westminster, the real questions go unanswered. How do we raise living standards in a low-growth world? Reverse decades of declining productivity? Restore public services? Care for an ageing population? Fund infrastructure? Tackle the climate crisis? Our political class seems bereft of vision. No serious diagnosis of our problems and even less of a plan to solve them. This month's budget offers a chance to change that, but it will require the courage to take on those whose wealth and power is holding our country back, because right now, wealth inequality is the rot at the heart of our society. It's undermining democracy, choking productivity, and fueling the far right. Whilst most people struggle, wealthy elites are laughing all the way to the bank. The numbers are staggering. The 50 richest families in the UK now hold more wealth than half the country combined. In Scotland, the 5 richest families own more than the poorest quarter of the population. In fact, those 5 Scottish families hold £19.3 billion, more than the Scottish Government collected in income tax last year, with their wealth growing faster than average earnings. Putting morality aside for a moment, this inequality is economically toxic. Why invest in making business more productive when it's easier to make millions from flipping houses, buying up public assets, or running outsourced services with guaranteed profits? The UK economy has been rewired to reward rent-seeking over real wealth creation. It needs to be reprogrammed to reward innovation, productivity, and social value. That gets to the heart of why the Chancellor's statement is so vital. Budgets reveal what governments value and the vision that underpins those values. Given the Chancellor's reluctance to break her self-imposed fiscal rules, tax rises seem inevitable, although predictions about which taxes might increase seem to change daily. But fairer taxes aren't a punishment, they're an investment in the kind of country we all want. Contrary to belief, there is evidence to support the notion that raising taxes for specific purposes gets the public on side. The past week alone we've had Lord Haughey, Sir Tom Hunter and the Tony Blair Institute, all bodies that, with respect, we've had our policy disagreements with, all supporting the notion of short-term tax rises for economic growth. Taxes are much needed to support progress on child poverty, the climate crisis, and the public services we all rely on. The real question is which taxes to raise. Income tax, while vital, can't do all the heavy lifting. To make the system fairer, we need to tax wealth properly. In the 1970s and early 1980s, household wealth was worth about 2 to 3 times GDP. Today, it's more than 6 times. Yet wealth taxes have barely budged, and some, like inheritance tax, are lower than they were then. In good faith, something that seems in short supply amongst political discourse these days, here's my pitch. The 5 policies that the Chancellor should adopt to tackle extreme wealth inequality. 1. A 2% wealth tax on fortunes over £10 million. This could raise up to £492 million per year from Scotland's 10 richest families alone, enough to lift more than 30,000 children out of poverty. 2. Reform capital gains tax so that people who make their money from stocks and property pay at least the same rate as workers. 3. Tax excessive bank profits, raising the bank's surcharge from 3% to 35%, the same rate as the Conservatives' windfall tax on energy firms, and could raise £50 billion over 4 years. 4. Crackdown on tax dodging, including a settling up tax to stop billionaires extracting wealth from the UK tax-free. 5. Apply national insurance to investment income, so landlords pay the same taxes as their tenants. These aren't radical ideas, albeit for politicians who lack the courage to do what is necessary, then I can imagine this seems revolutionary. They reflect growing consensus among economists like Thomas Piketty, Joseph Stiglitz, and Ha-Joon Chang, and even among the wealthy themselves. A recent poll by Patriotic Millionaires found that 80% of UK millionaires support a 2% wealth tax on fortunes over £10 million. Among those who would actually pay it, support rises to 85%. It isn't just millionaires that support a wealth tax. Polling shows 79% of the Scottish public do too. The forthcoming budget provides a chance for this UK government to rebalance our economy away from those hoarding wealth. It is time that the whispers fell silent and self-serving politicians stopped playing political games and instead set out a vision for change that takes on those vested interests holding our country back. Ros Foyer is General Secretary of the STUC. The article was read to you by Elizabeth.
From the Herald, Scotland, Tuesday the 18th of November 2025. News. Scotland dementia deaths rise to the highest level in more than 20 years. Article written by Hannah Brown. Scotland has recorded a 2% rise in deaths caused by Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, compared with 2023, according to the new statistics from the National Record of Scotland, NRS. In 2024, 6,612 deaths were registered with these conditions as the underlying cause, 121 more than in 2023. It is the highest annual total since 2000. The mortality rate, 122 per 100,000 people, has almost doubled over the last 2 decades. NRS Head of Vital Events Statistics Philippa Haxton said, "The rate of deaths from these causes has risen alongside the growing number of people in the oldest age groups. The average age of death from Alzheimer's disease or another typical sign of dementia is 87. Of those who died from these conditions, 85% were over 80. This is one of the leading causes of death for people in Scotland and accounts for around 1 in 10 of all deaths. In total, 10,618 deaths registered mentioned Alzheimer's disease or other dementias. The rate for this broadening group, covering both underlying and contributory causes, has fallen to its lowest level since 2014. The figures also show that almost 2/3 of deaths caused by Alzheimer's and other dementias were female, with a similar proportion occurring in care homes. There were significant regional differences. Falkirk in Clackmannanshire recorded the highest mortality rates due to dementia and Alzheimer's between 2020 and 2024, while the Scottish Borders had the lowest. Article written by Hannah Brown, read by Helen Classy.
This is from the Herald Scotland of Tuesday the 18th of November 2025 from the business section. Major whisky makers join forces for help to restore peatland on Islay. This article is by Craig Williams. A landmark conservation partnership has been announced between RSPB Scotland and major whisky distillers Suntory Global Spirits, Diageo and the Glenmorangie Company to restore peatland on one of Scotland's most iconic landscapes. The project at the O Nature Reserve on Islay is set to secure vital habitats for wildlife, to store carbon, and to celebrate the cultural roots that link Scotland's nature, people and whisky. RSPB Scotland said the unprecedented sector-wide collaboration underlines how working together across industries is vital to restoring Scotland's nature. Over the next 5 years, the distilleries will collectively contribute £1.6 million to restore approximately 1,000 hectares of peatland. The focus will include making the peatland more resistant to flooding, improving resilience against wildfires, and providing improved habitat for many species, transforming the landscape into a healthy, thriving blanket bog. Peatlands are a key part of the landscape, covering more than 20% of Scotland's land area and storing around 1,600 million tonnes of carbon. Healthy peat plays a vital role in carbon storage and combating the effects of climate change, and in maintaining Scotland's water quality and rich biodiversity. Peatlands reduce flood risk and support farming and crofting. Peatland also acts as a vital habitat for a variety of plants and animals, with the restoration work on the Ower set to benefit threatened species such as curlew, snipe, hen harrier, and large heath butterfly. RSPB Scotland Director Anne McCall said, "This incredibly exciting partnership at the Ower will allow us to return some of Scotland's large and internationally important peatlands back to health. It is a shining example of how conservation and industry can work hand in hand in restoring Scotland's incredible and unique habitats. We are extremely encouraged to see businesses collaborating to share the responsibility of environmental restoration and protection. Healthy peatlands also help improve water quality, which should benefit both wildlife and people. The Ower contains a diverse array of habitats and species, from windswept moorland to nature-friendly farmland. However, much of the blanket bog on the nature reserve has been drained due to centuries of domestic peat cutting. This has reduced the peat's capacity to take in carbon from the air. According to RSPB Scotland, restoring the land will allow the peat to revegetate and return to a healthy, thriving habitat that delivers positively for climate and biodiversity. Alistair Longwell, Head of Distilling and Environment at Suntory Global Spirits, said, "We are delighted to be part of this forward-thinking collaboration that combines the expertise of RSPB and industry counterparts to restore peatland on Islay. It marks the latest step in Suntory Global Spirits' ongoing global sustainability commitment, including the Peatland Water Sanctuary Initiative. We've dedicated more than $4 million to the conservation and restoration of peatlands and natural watersheds, and to date we have restored over 370 hectares across Scotland, including at the Ower. We look forward to working with our new partners to continue protecting these unique landscapes for generations to come." Caspar McRae, President and CEO of the Glenmorangie Company, said, "At Ardbeg, we recognise the vital role peatlands play in Scotland's natural heritage and in securing a sustainable future. We are proud to be part of this partnership at the Oa, working alongside RSPB Scotland and fellow distillers to restore this precious landscape. By investing in the health of our peatlands, we are investing in the resilience of our environment, supporting biodiversity and safeguarding the legacy for generations to come." That article was by Craig Williams.
That concludes this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels, rate and review, and to tell your friends about our service.